Welcome back to In Substantia, a place where we try to look at things a little differently and maybe, just maybe, shake up some of our assumptions. I'm Gabor Farkas. We're continuing our conversation with Adam Kahane. In part one, we really started to unpack his groundbreaking approach to global conflict resolution. We talked about how his new book, Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems, suggests we can make systemic change through our own actions, and how this idea of stretch collaboration lets us move forward even when trust isn't there right away. Adam also shared some really insightful thoughts on the difference between mediation and facilitation, and how his experience in places like South Africa, Canada, and Colombia show us that even when people seem worlds apart, they can find common ground. Now we're going to get even more practical. Adam, let's talk about some specific things we can do to connect with others, even when things are really tense. And we'll also explore those tricky dynamics of power, love, and justice in today's world. And you know, this makes me think about my own experience. On my own personal journey, I came to the realization maybe 5 years ago that I always thought that understanding was an essential part for me to be able to engage with a situation of conflict, understanding why people think a certain way and why they behave a certain way. And the realization came that understanding is optional. What is really important is to accept that there are other ways of looking at an issue that you might not understand, that you might never understand for whatever reasons, cultural, or because you're of a different gender and your body is under the influence of hormones that I actually don't have. So the understanding became an optional part. What is essential is to allow yourself and allow others to have a different perspective and to work with that.
Yes, I think that's true and important, and I think we can go further. So, in the workshops that I've done, there's one activity that we almost always do. It's the simplest possible activity, and it's the following: is to say to people, well, we're going to have lunch in 45 minutes. Look around the room, find the person most different from you, and go for a walk with them before lunch. So you couldn't have a simpler activity than that. And what I started to notice is that people found this better than anything else, better than the small group exercises, better than the flip charts, better than the post-it notes, better than the dialogue. This paired walk. And they would often say, that was useful. Can we do that again? And so I really started to investigate this question about what's with the paired walk? Why is it so, why do people experience it as so useful? And the first explanation I had is that, well, there's a mechanical part of it. You're walking through the world together. You're looking in the same direction. You're encountering the situation, the path forks, there's a stick, there's a tree, there's a bird. You're not looking at your phone, you're not looking at your papers, you're talking. And this is certainly part of it. But I once had a conversation with a Mexican Catholic theologian named Lucila Cerviche about exactly this. She'd been in one of these workshops and experienced the walk. And I said, what do you think it is? Why is this walk such a big deal? She said, Adam, I think your explanation misses the point. The thing about the walk is, first, we encounter each other as fellow human beings in the world together with eyes and legs, or however many we have, with families and senses. And then maybe as a result of this encounter, we will choose to change our thinking or our relationships or what we're going to do. But it's the sequence which is important, Adam. She said this is the opposite to the sequence of the Catholic confessional, where first you have to admit you're wrong, and second, you're readmitted to the communion. And so I would say that I agree with what you said, but I would go further in saying that what is most important is to recognize that this other person is a human being. I might disagree with everything they stand. I might oppose them. I might consider them my enemy. I might disagree with them. I might mistrust them. And I might still feel that way after an hour or a day or a year. But I do recognize that they are a human being and that there's reasons for them doing what they're doing. So that for me is maybe the most basic point of all. And I did a lot of my work in the 1990s in Latin America, Colombia and Mexico, and also Peru. And a Peruvian psychotherapist, Max Hernandez, once said to me, the crucial thing is not that I see what you see, but that you help me, but that what you're seeing might be in my blind spot. He said it more clearly than I'm saying it right now. And what's really important is not to see that your dream is the same as my dream, because that doesn't always happen, but that your dream is not my nightmare. And so I consider these very fundamental. From that, a lot can be built.
When you encounter situations where facilitation leads to unexpected or even unwelcome outcomes for participants, how do you handle that?
Such as what kind of example are you thinking of?
I wasn't thinking about anything. I was thinking that it's possible, given when you bring people in a room and if they don't trust each other and there are high tensions and you start working, then emotions flare up that can transform into one part of the group bullying another, or even violence. When I can't think of all the examples.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have only once had a shooting in a workshop. It actually wasn't in a workshop; it was during a break. So but more serious answer is, yeah, I treat participants as adults. That lots of things are going to happen, some of which will be visible to me, many of which I'll never even know about or notice. People will say something or be upset or hurt or angry or disappointed, and my job is simply to create a space where people can work on that as they wish to and in their own time, including a lot of it being outside the meeting room. That's why walks and breaks and drinks and late night conversations in the bar are so important. So for me, my focus is on creating a space and time which is conducive, not an airport conference room for an hour, but what's called in facilitation a social island, somewhere away for a few days where things happen and then there's a chance to process them, sometimes process them in the group, sometimes process them privately. And my judgment of success is, do people want to continue? And by that measure, I think our work has been very successful. Probably the dropout rate is, I don't know, 5%. People generally find it useful and they want to come back and they think this is valuable, and that I'm able to learn and make relationships and take actions that I wouldn't otherwise be able to. You know, in our work, we always say that we always ask people to keep confidences. That's to say, not to repeat what somebody else said. It's to use the Chatham House rule. And it's always interested me that people very rarely break it. I can only remember one time where somebody posted that on Facebook that he'd been at such and such a meeting, that he'd been at the meeting, and people were so angry at him that he was so embarrassed that he took it down immediately and never happened again. And my interpretation of that phenomenon is very simple. People don't break the rule because they don't want to, they consider the space valuable and they don't want to endanger it. period. So that's what I consider to be success. There's a space where people can connect and talk and learn and find ways forward with people that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to, and they keep coming back for that reason. That's success.
I'm going to ask something a little bit easier because we've been, tackling deep issues. I'm saying this tongue in cheek. Given the recent headlines, we are recording this in early March. What would you like to say regarding what has played out in the Oval Office between visiting President Zelensky, President Trump, and Vice President Vance?
Well, I don't think I have anything original to say about this. But I would just make two comments, which is coming back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the conversation. I think there's a lot of people trying to impose their solutions on others, to use their money or their guns or their votes to say it's going to be like this, whether you like it or not. And I think so. I consider that a very important backdrop. There's a lot of that going on. It took place in the Oval Office. It takes place in many contexts. And I think you could argue there's more of that going around these days. And so that's why I said at the very beginning of the conversation that I'm interested in supporting a collaborative option as a substitute for the authoritarian option, with an important clarification that often when we talk about collaboration, it's collaborating, working together with some people in order to be strong enough to work against other people. So collaboration is always with some people and without some people and often against some people. So that's an important complication. So I'm concerned about the rise in authoritarian, dictatorial, violent imposition. Seems to be going around. And I'm therefore doing what I can to support the collaborative option, in particular, the ability to collaborate with people who we think are different than us or who we might not agree with or like or trust. So that's one comment. The second comment, which might be more useful, is just that we're in a period of flux. I personally find the changes and the disruption frightening, unnerving, surprising, including as a Canadian. So I'm not celebrating disruption and flux, but I am saying that we don't know how this is all going to turn out. And what interested me even more than the conflict in the Oval Office is what happened the next day amongst European and also, I guess, Canadian and Turkish leaders. So alliances are shifting, and hopefully we'll end up with a situation which is less unipolar or less dependent on the benevolence of one powerful actor. That's my hope out of this very difficult situation.
You talk about stretch collaboration, that true collaboration often involves tension. Can you explain this idea in practical terms?
Yes, I wrote a book called Collaborating with the Enemy, which was published in 2017, and I'm in the process of preparing a second edition, which is 90% new. I didn't realize it would be like that when I started it, which will be published in November of this year. Same title.
90%.
Yeah, it wasn't I just think there's a clearer and more useful way to say what I wanted to say than 10 years ago. So it's very much on my mind, and it's, what's that?
It could have been an entirely different book.
Well, it's the same subject. The title will be the same. It is trying to answer the same question, which is how do we work with people we don't agree with or like or trust. I just think it's more important than I thought it was, and less straightforward than I thought it was. And so I've tried to find a clearer and more useful way to articulate it. And the phrase stretch collaboration comes from that book, and it's still in the book. That's the 10% that's still there. And the point I'm making is that it is possible to collaborate across difference. And in fact, there's two ways to do it. The conventional way to do it, what I call conventional collaboration, is to limit the scope of the collaboration and the breadth of the collaborators to people who see themselves as being on the same team and who are willing to align and subordinate their own interest to the interests of the collective. And in the first edition, I was a bit dismissive of conventional collaboration. I think I said it's on its way out, it's obsolete. I think that's completely incorrect. So that's a major change in the framing of the book. I think it's actually the most common way of collaborating. In fact, that's what most people think collaboration has to be. And it's very useful, and it's how almost all organizations and teams and symphony orchestras and organizations run. That if you want to be on the team, you have to fit into the team and follow the leader, and lots of very useful things get done that way. What I call stretch collaboration is, how do we collaborate when those assumptions are not true? When there's high conflict and or high complexity, when people don't consider themselves on the same team at all. And in a way, mediation and facilitation, what we've been talking about on this call up to now, all falls into that second category or that second type of collaboration that I'm calling stretch collaboration, where people say, I'm not on the same team as you, I'm on a different team. And maybe we can do something together, but my loyalty and my interests are not subordinated to the collaboration. So in a way, I'm describing something that's very familiar to you. But what I find useful is this metaphor of stretching, which is it requires you to go beyond what's comfortable, and to go beyond what's comfortable in three ways. First of all, to embrace conflict as well as connection. Again, this is obvious to you as a mediator, but not obvious to most people who run teams, who expect things to be agreeable and harmonious, and for people to subordinate their own agendas to the group agenda, which won't work in a situation of high conflict and or high complexity. Secondly, and we were talking about this earlier, it requires you to experiment a way forward. In such contexts, you cannot know and cannot agree on what should be done before trying it out. So you have to try it out and make your way forward one step at a time. And thirdly, and we touched upon this earlier as well, is it's not adequate to consider yourself outside the system, where you're just telling other people what they ought to do. You have to focus your attention on what is it that I can do next, period. Because these are situations where what you think other people ought to do usually has zero impact. So that's what I mean by stretch collaboration. And it's the kind of collaboration that's required to deal with contexts that are high in conflict and or high in complexity. And this is what I've just said. The reason I've said it so fluently is this is what I've been writing and rewriting for the past weeks. And this is the part was not in the previous book and is much clearer to me now than it was.
How do you approach situations where one or more parties actively benefit from maintaining the status quo of conflict?
This is a very good question, and it's also a very common question, because often people come to me and they say, well, I'd love to collaborate, but I need collaborating means with those people, and those people don't want to. And the way I think about that is what's required in these contexts. I think there's two approaches that I've found are helpful. I guess you could say a usual and an unusual. The usual approach is to say, okay, well, let me do things to make them less comfortable with the status quo. Let me protest outside their office. Let me make life uncomfortable for them, very uncomfortable for them. So that's a common thing to do. Is I want to change the status quo. You like it. I'm going to change it so you don't like it anymore, or at least you doubt whether you can continue to maintain it, and therefore you're willing to work with me to address the concerns I have. A less obvious answer, but which I think is very helpful, is to say, often people say, well, I want to work on X, and I'm concerned about X. Those people aren't concerned about X, and I need them to agree with me that X is the problem before we can do anything. And in those cases, what I say is, why don't you go talk to them, not about X, but ask them, how do they see the situation? In other words, I had a teacher who told me that these situations are not simply problems with solutions. They're problematic situations that different actors see as problematic for different reasons. And what is very often the case is I may think that the problem is X. The problem with the current situation is X. They may think the problem with the current situation is Y. We have different reasons for wanting to work on it, but we both agree that the situation is problematic and maybe we can make it better. That's all that's required. I once talked about this with a very brilliant Colombian politician. His name's Antanas Mocas. He was mayor of Bogota and a mathematics professor. Really brilliant guy. And he said, Adam, the best agreements are ones that different parties support for different reasons. He said it's not an accident that in the Colombian Congress, when you vote, you don't give the reason for the vote. And the really robust agreements are ones that have multiple logics, so that if logic X goes away, the whole thing doesn't go away. So it's again, this idea that we must all agree and have the same reason and the same values and trust each other. This is not true and is a very limiting set of assumptions.
Your approach can embrace tension and discomfort as part of collaboration. How far is too far? Do you think there's a point where pushing too far can backfire, or does productive conflict always have value?
Well, I think you've answered your question by the way you asked it. Of course, you can go too far, or you go what might be too far now might be okay in a day or a month. So, and what might be too far in a large group might be possible on a walk or a conversation in a bar. So, I think the more I work on this, the more I realize there aren't clear red lines, that I can never work with those people. I can never talk about this subject. It all depends. It all depends on where we are and what's going on and what's needed. It might be that it's not good to talk about this right now, but maybe later we can talk about this, or I can talk about it in a very vague way, and maybe when I get to know you better, I can talk about it in a more direct way or a more personal way. And similarly, I may think I could never work with you, but, well, there are circumstances where I wish I didn't have to work with you, but I think I do. So I think what's becoming clear to me in this conversation, and I want to thank you for it, is I think my main point is that these assumptions that we have to agree or trust or have the same problem or the same solution or be open about everything. These are all too black and white. All of these statements are too black and white. And collaboration and I suppose a lot of things in life are all in the gray. And it's learning to be comfortable in the gray.
What situations have you encountered where participants turned their frustration on you as a facilitator? How did you handle it? Do you or can you ever plan ahead on how you would handle it?
Well, every time I think I've given a great closing statement, you come back with another question. I've done this. I've given at least 3 great closing comments. So anyway, I'm joking. But yes, this often happens that that people are uncomfortable and frustrated, and they take it out on the facilitator, who is an easy target, easier perhaps than criticizing other members of other participants or criticizing themselves. So yes, this often happens. And it also often happens because often I do things that don't work. People say, oh, that didn't work. So I don't think I don't plan for this per se, except to try to be well rested so as to be able to respond rather than react. But I think the gold standard here is for everybody to understand that we're doing something together which is not easy or straightforward or formulaic, and there's going to be things that are slow or frustrating or annoying, and we're going to figure it out together. And so, often, very often, we'll adjust course in the middle of the day. This doesn't seem to be working. Should we try this? And to enroll participants, either as a whole or a committee, a subcommittee, of thinking through these choices together. Again, so much of this is about developing the capacity to work in this collaborative way, including to adjust and change course when things are not going as we wanted them to or expected them to.
You have acknowledged that meaningful transformation, whether in societies, organizations, or relationships, take time. Yet many stakeholders seek quick solutions. How do you reconcile this tension in the facilitation work?
Well, I had a mentor, the late Bill O'Brien, who said to me, it takes 9 months to make a baby, no matter how many people you put on the job. So something just take time. You might wish it could be done in a month, but it can't. It's not possible. And very often we're dealing with situations that have been going on for years, if not longer. And so it's simply not reasonable to expect them to resolve in an hour or a day. That said, I think what's useful is to try to have small achievements, small wins, and notice them. Oh, okay, well, we at least agreed some of the subjects we have to talk about, or at least agreed we're going to try this out tomorrow, or we at least agreed that we're going to hear this viewpoint. Okay, this is not a solution, but we're making progress. We're getting somewhere, so let's keep going.
Well, if we connect it to the previous question, sometimes you try something and you realize, oh, this doesn't work, or this didn't work. How do you know that it didn't work or you didn't give it enough time?
Well, as I said before, for me, success is that we're willing to continue. We think we're making progress. So failure is people, from my perspective, failure is people thinking this is useless, I'm leaving. But again, my objective is to not make this my problem or my assignment, but a collective assignment where I'm trying to be helpful. I may be making mistakes, but I'm trying to be helpful. I don't have my own agenda except to help you work out what you're trying to work out, and let's think together. Let's just spend 5 minutes talking about what we want to work on next. I don't take all the responsibility on my own shoulders. I think that's foolish, heroic and foolish, or foolishly heroic.
Both can be true. You have written about how change unfolds in unpredictable, non-linear ways and how groups must stay engaged despite maybe setbacks. What methods have you developed to help groups stay engaged over time, especially when progress feels slow or uncertain?
Well, I think I would answer it the same way I answered the previous question. In complex contexts, by definition, and now I'm going back to Snowden's definition, by definition, we can't know in advance what will work. That's just the nature of a complex situation. We have to try it and see. And most people understand this. They know that these are not technical challenges. They know, using Heifetz's language, they're adaptive challenges that we have to work out as we go. So I think my answer to a lot of these questions is I find that people are intelligent and mature and serious enough to understand that these aren't they're not simple situations. They're not problems that have solutions. They're not that if you just do what, if that I, the facilitator or one of the actors, can come in and just tell everybody what it's going to be and they all go, yes, that's it, let's do it. People understand that's not how things are. And that often we can only learn how the system works by doing something and finding it doesn't work the way we thought it did. And so we have to try something else. Certainly, I would say almost everything in my life I've learned, it's because things are not the way I thought they'd be. And I do something thinking it's one way, I bump my head, I fall down, I realize, oh, it's not like that. I wonder how it is. So I don't think any of that is a problem or an impediment. The problem is if people say, we're not getting anywhere. Now that's a problem. We're not getting anywhere. We're making no progress at all. Well, then stop and try something else. That's when people get frustrated. That's when I get frustrated. We're spending all this time and money and we're not getting anywhere at all. Now that is failing. And I'm not so arrogant to say, no, just give me another day, give me another week, give me another month. This is definitely going to work. Sometimes things don't work. We've got the wrong people, we've got the wrong problem, we've got the wrong time. Let's just stop what we're doing and see if there's another way.
You argue that effective leadership requires balancing the forces of power and love rather than choosing one over the other. Leaders must both assert and connect, challenge and support, push forward and listen deeply. How can leaders integrate both effectively without tipping too far in one direction?
Okay, so this is a very deep subject, and it is true I wrote a book 15 years ago or so called Power and Love, but what I'm now writing brings in a third element, which is justice. And in a way, my inspiration is a very difficult book by a famous German-American Protestant existential theologian called Paul Tillich. It was very popular in his day. And this book has been inspiring to me, not because I'm super interested in German-American Protestant existential theology. I would have to say it's not really my thing, but because I think the model has huge explanatory value. So I have worked a lot on this, and I'm bringing it I've brought it into several of my books, including Everyday Habits, and more substantially in the new edition of Collaborating with the Enemy. And to try to say something quite complicated briefly, all three drives are important. The drive to unity, which is love, the drive to self-realization, which is power, and the drive to reducing injustice is justice. But many people favor one or the other. And so they focus only on one, and that's always a mistake. And I first heard this idea expressed by one of Tillich's students, Martin Luther King Jr., who said in one of his final speeches before he was assassinated, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." So my understanding of this work, collaboration, is that it always requires all three. It requires attention to the self-realization of the individual wholes, the wholeness of each actor, wholeness, ambition, interests, perspective, reality of each actor. The fact that each actor is part of a larger whole, that's love, and the structure which enables power and love to be enacted, which is justice. And I'll just say you can go very far with that triad. You can understand a lot of the naughtiest, K-N-O-T-I-E-S-T, the naughtiest aspects of this work by understanding that it's about balancing these three drives, which do not have a stable balancing point, but which require being out of balance and rebalancing. And power and love are the basics because it's wholes and parts, respectively, and justice is the mechanism to reconcile the wholes and parts. Sorry if that sounded very abstract. It's because it is, but I found it to have huge explanatory value, and that's why I keep working at it.
Maybe we'll introduce a different level of abstraction with the next question. How do you see the balance of power, love, and justice playing out differently in politics versus business or civil society?
Well, I've many times quoted James Hillman on this point, who says that power is more visible and discussed in politics and business, and this is healthy. Whereas in civil society, or he says the helping professions, teaching, nursing, I would say mediation, facilitation, power is often considered something bad, which must be denied, and it doesn't go away, it just goes underground. So what I think is healthy and about politics and business, which is why I enjoy them both, is because the self-realization of each actor is discussable, like when I referred to John Smith interests. It's about me, my interests, what I'm trying to do, my bottom line, my development. The problem, of course, and this is what King meant when he said power without love is reckless and abusive, that if everybody's just doing what they want without any attention to the impact on other people or to the whole, the result is reckless and abusive at best and genocidal at worst. So, but good politicians and good business people are always focused on reconciling parts and wholes. That's the whole game. That's all you're doing. Parts and wholes, parts and wholes, parts and wholes. Justice comes in as in Tillich's language, the structure which enables both to be activated so that we don't get out of balance, too much power or too much love. I'm more worried, as King was, the power without love is obvious. Everybody gets it's the recklessness and abuse, the brutality, the violence, the genocide. What's more of an issue, because it's not noticed, is love without power being sentimental and anemic. Sentimental and anemic at best, and at worst, cynically reproducing the status quo. So my concern is not power. My concern is the denial of power.
There was a study done in order to determine in which kind of jobs and professions you are likely to encounter more psychopathic individuals or individuals with psychopathic traits. So what came out on top is politicians and CEOs. So given that the study has shown that it's difficult to find the right balance of power, love, and justice if those traits are true in the individuals practicing this kind of work.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a study made by somebody who is neither a politician nor a business person. So I'm not sure. I don't know whether that's true. Maybe I had an interesting experience when I published the book Power and Love. I gave a lot of talks about it. And in one talk, there was a man who stood up and said, I am a clergyman. I think he was an Anglican clergyman. And the work I do these days is on sexual abuse in the church. And I thought he was going to say, this is a problem of abuse of power. But he said the opposite. He said, this is a problem of people who don't know how to use power properly. So this is more closer to Hillman's point. So the abuse of power by powerful people is obvious. We know how to recognize it. We know how to deal with it. We know how to counteract it with countervailing power, with laws, with attention to larger wholes. I am more worried, as I said 5 minutes ago, about people who think that power is a dirty thing and therefore are unable to work with it in a healthy way.
Looking back, is there a moment in your career that fundamentally changed how you see collaboration?
Well, there actually are many such moments, and my writing is all based on such moments of, as I said, times when I thought I knew how things worked, and I realized they don't work like that, and that's what fundamentally changes my point of view. All the way from the very first experience in South Africa, where I realized that collaboration across difference is possible and can be joyful and productive, creative. I think I've mentioned many of them. The event in Canada with First Nations, where I realized that pretending I was not part of the situation was a very limiting pretense, and many
Yes,
others.
you did mention
Yeah.
a few. So
Yeah.
if you could challenge a common assumption about how we resolve conflicts, what would it be?
Well, the assumption that, the one that's become clear to me in this conversation, and I thank you for that, is the assumption that we have to have agreement, trust, same understanding of the problem, same understanding of the solution, the ability to be open. None of this is true. Or the same values. None of this is true. It would be nice, but it's not required. And so I consider that a hugely limiting assumption because those things are rarely true. People say, well, I guess we can't collaborate because these things aren't the case. And this is a highly limiting assumption. The other limiting assumption is the assumption that collaborating is always the best option, which it isn't. Sometimes we have to force, sometimes we have to adapt, sometimes we have to exit, sometimes we have to collaborate. And it's really important to realize that we have 4 different ways of dealing with problematic solutions, not just one.
Thank you for your time. Before concluding, what is it that we're not talking about, but we should be?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I think we're talking about a lot of important things these days. And one of the things we are talking about, which I think we should be talking about, is that the last 70, the structure which has been in place internationally for the last 60 years is crumbling before our eyes. And lots of things will change.
Thank you very much, Adam, for your time and your candor and all these very important answers to my questions.
Thank you, Gower. Thank you very much.